Day 177 of the war in Gaza. The ongoing operation at Shifa Hospital continued over the weekend with troops killing gunmen, including a top Hamas leader. IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi said on Friday that Israel has achieved a major goal in Shifa Hospital. Israel is also fighting an UN inaccuracy and smear campaigns about famine in Gaza. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The head of manpower in Hamas's military wing, Raed Thabat, was among those killed in the continuing operation in Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. Thabat was known to be among Hamas's top 10 senior commanders and was responsible for R&D and production. He was found and eliminated during the ongoing operation at Shifa, attempting to escape, along with 2 other terrorists, into the hospital courtyard, part of a planned attack on IDF soldiers. Fighting in Hamas has also continued in southern Gaza's Al-Qarara and Al-Amal neighborhoods of Khan Yunis, as the IDF seized weapons and located sites belonging to the terror group in the area. In Al-Amal, troops of the Givati Brigade killed several gunmen who tried to attack them with explosive devices. The Air Force carried out dozens of strikes across Gaza over the weekend, mostly in Al-Amal and Al-Qarara, to support the maneuvering ground troops. Meanwhile, Israel is contesting the recent UN-backed report on the humanitarian situation in Gaza that said famine was imminent and likely by May in northern Gaza. Kojat, the Israeli Defense Ministry body responsible for civilian affairs in Palestinian territories, said the UN report contains multiple factual flaws based on information received from Hamas. They underestimate the amount of water available per day, Kojat says. There are reports in Palestinian media every day of food markets filled with food of all types and kinds in various parts of Gaza. Kojat will continue expanding efforts to facilitate aid into and across the Gaza Strip.
They deny the kidnapping of our children, the murder of our grandchildren, the rape of our daughters. The new Nazis we face today will stop at nothing to destroy civilization as we know it. The World Jewish Congress was created exactly for these times like this, so every Jew can fall asleep at night knowing they are safe in their own home. We are a voice for the Jewish people everywhere. We are the World Jewish Congress.
And 177 days in, and there are still 134 hostages being held in captivity by Hamas. After the terror group rejected a deal for a ceasefire last week, talks are set to once again resume. ILTV's Rachel Safdie is in Tel Aviv's Hostages Square with the latest. Rachel, what can you tell us?
Halidar, well, yes, I'm standing here in the Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, as on Friday we saw that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approved of the delegation made up of Mossad and Shin Bet officials to go to both Doha and to Cairo to remain negotiations, to remain in direct talks with Hamas. Now, we've heard for weeks now of these ongoing negotiations, and we don't actually see a deal or even some optimism for a deal coming out of it. We did have some hope last week when we saw that Israel accepted to some version of a truce, and yet after we saw that the U.S. failed to use their veto power in the UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, after that we saw Hamas completely not only denying once again the offer that Israel had made for a ceasefire, but also saying that they're taking a step back and they will not be accepting any sort of deal that doesn't include the complete withdrawal of IDF forces from the Gaza Strip, which to Israel means losing the war, and also seeing the allowing Palestinians return from the south of the Gaza Strip to the north of the Gaza Strip. Now, Mossad Chief David Barnea has actually said that he believes we can see a deal coming out of these rounds of negotiations if Israel is more lenient regarding specifically this point of allowing Palestinians back north to the Gaza Strip. And while some ministers like Benny Gantz do agree with him on this point, we see that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi disagree with the Mossad chief on this point. These are the latest updates on the negotiations. We'll have to wait and see what happens. The delegation is flying to both Egypt and Qatar today.
And you know, Rachel, it's been almost 6 months. It's kind of unimaginable what the families of the hostages are going through. And I know you've spoken with some of them. What is the feeling there about this new round of negotiations?
Right, so regarding family members of hostages, it's actually amazing to see how hopeful and how strong they are, as their loved ones have been taken captive by terrorists for almost 6 months now. So yesterday we saw a protest in Tel Aviv where thousands of people, including family members of hostages, came to call for a hostage deal, appeal to the government, and really ask that they do everything in their power to have some form of a deal that brings some, if not all, ideally, all hostages home. Now, I do want to mention specifically two families that have waited for almost a decade now to receive the bodies of captives. Hadar Goldin and Oren Shaul, they were killed and their bodies were taken captive in 2014. And we have new reports saying that Israel would accept a deal where specifically regarding their two bodies would be returned in exchange for some Palestinian prisoners. Now, we don't know anything from Hamas's negotiator side. We don't know if we would be seeing their return in a greater deal. We'll keep you updated. As we know, today the delegation is going for more talks, but the families do remain very hopeful.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much for the update. And in other news, Israel's Khan Broadcasting Network reported that a top U.S. general has laid out what the Biden administration alternative for a Rafah operation would look like. Israel is set to send a delegation to discuss this possibility. ILTV's Devo Klein has the report.
According to the report by Khan, Washington is set to announce their alternative plan for a Rafah operation, one that will minimize civilian casualties in the Egypt-bordering city. Netanyahu has stated time and again that the IDF must enter Rafah and eliminate the remaining 4 Hamas battalions in the Hamas stronghold. To accomplish this, Washington offered the following. According to the report, General Charles Q. Brown Jr., the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, presented the proposal, which includes securing Gaza's border with Egypt with technological advances, this to prevent the smuggling of weapons through the Philadelphia corridor. Secondly, Washington suggested the isolation of the city of Rafah with the launch of targeted raids and the establishment of a joint control room to coordinate on the targeted operations. This report comes just after discussions in Washington between U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The goal of Washington, as explicitly described earlier in their objection to a Rafah operation, is the fear for civilian casualties, in light of the number of casualties coming out of the operation in northern Gaza. Despite the recalling of the Washington delegation by Netanyahu after the U.S. failed to use their veto in the UN Security Council resolution for a ceasefire, a U.S. official then said the sides were working on a new date for the interagency meeting.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And joining us now with more on the latest in the Gaza war is veteran journalist and Middle East expert Yoni Ben Mimi. Thank you for joining us. So Yoni, another week has gone by and it seems that Israel is not truly moving forward or making any significant gains in the war. What is your assessment of this situation? I mean, what does Israel need to do or intend to do now?
I think we have a lot of gains in the war, but it's true what you said, that Israel is not moving forward. And this is basically because of the strong American pressure on Israel not to do anything major militarily-wise during the holy month of Ramadan, which will be ending in 2 weeks or 10 days. So Israel is limited in that period, but I think that we have a few achievements, and what is needed definitely is to occupy the Rafah area and take over the Philadelphia corridor, the pipeline that they the weapons are coming from Egypt to Hamas in Gaza Strip. And also we have to occupy the last two refugee camps in the center of Gaza Strip. I'm talking about Deir el-Balah and Nusayrat. This is what is imperative to do in order to finish the war in Gaza.
You know, there are reportedly a number of Hamas battalions in Rafah, and many hostages are said to be held there as well. But it doesn't seem like an operation in Rafah can be avoided. Do you agree with the U.S. assessment that there are alternatives?
Of course, there are always alternatives, but we don't want to drag this war. If we do not occupy Rafah in a big military operation, then this whole thing of fighting terrorism in Fatah, in Rafah, and getting rid of the 4 battalions of Hamas that are still deployed there, it will take a few months if we do it by stages like the American wants. Instead of doing it in a full-scale operation, that will take a month to occupy this area. So this is what the American wants. I don't know if Israel will agree to that. There is a team, a high-ranking team that is going to United States, headed by Minister Ron Dermer and Tzachi Hanegbi, who is the security advisor to Netanyahu. So they are going to discuss this thing with the Americans, and we'll see what will come out of it. And I think basically that it's a mistake. We have to get it over with. And also, there are still 2 battalions of Hamas that are deployed in the center of Gaza in refugee camps, Nusayrat and Deir el-Balah, and we also have to occupy these 2 refugee camps. We're talking about a few thousands of terrorists that are still deployed in Rafah and in the center of Gaza Strip, and we have to eliminate this military threat.
And you know, you also mentioned the Philadelphia corridor, the main route Hamas uses to smuggle weapons, through Egypt. And one of the stages that the U.S. has proposed is the alternative for a Rafah operation is to use sort of advanced technology to prevent the export of weapons. Do you think that this is a viable option? I mean, what's your take on the whole Philadelphia corridor situation today?
Yeah, this is a viable option, but the Egyptians, I know that Secretary of State Blinken, in the last visit to Egypt, he discussed it with the Egyptian President Sisi, and he rejected this idea. And even if Israel agrees, still you first have to destroy the existing tunnels under this corridor, and only then implement the American idea. But you cannot start with that, because what is needed is to destroy these tunnels that are under this corridor.
And looking now to the hostages, negotiations once again resuming in Cairo, but Hamas does not seem to be in any hurry to reach a deal. It has rejected all new deals, including just last week after the UN Security Council vote. It doesn't seem to be feeling the pressure. I mean, what's your assessment of this?
Why should Hamas agree for a deal if there is no military pressure on Hamas? There isn't. There's no political pressure on Hamas. We know there isn't, because the United States is not putting pressure on Qatar, so Qatar will put pressure on Hamas. And Yahya Sinwar, who is hiding in the tunnels surrounded by the Israeli hostages as human shields, he sees that the Israeli government is in no hurry. They don't want to make any necessary pressure on Hamas to bring about the release of the hostages. So he's in no hurry. He's not in a hurry to anywhere. He's still waiting to see what the Israelis are going to do, and he is sure that he has a good bargaining card, a good bargaining chip in his hand, the Israeli hostages, and with this bargaining card, he can put pressure on Israel and eventually end the war as someone who won over Israel and stayed in power in Gaza, and this will be a big defeat for Israel. This is the way he thinks. And unfortunately, the Israeli government, for some reason which is not clear, they say it's because of an American pressure. But what they should do is accelerate the war and get it over with. Otherwise, Israel will really be defeated.
All right. Well, Yoni Ben Mimi, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you.
And in other news, this morning, a terrorist carried out a stabbing attack in Beersheba at the city's central bus station. The victim, a man in his 20s, was taken to Soroka Hospital in moderate condition, while another soldier was treated for light injuries. According to the reports, the terrorist was neutralized at the scene. Meanwhile, the terrorist who carried out the shooting attack in the Jordan Valley on Thursday has turned himself in to authorities. According to media reports, the suspect gave himself up to troops who had been conducting a manhunt since the shooting. 3 Israelis were wounded when the attacker opened fire on school buses and other cars on Route 90, the main north-south artery in the Jordan Valley. The gunman opened fire with an assault rifle before fleeing the scene. 2 bulletproof school buses and 2 cars were hit in the shooting. And turning to the north, where foreign and Syrian reports say Israel attacked Hezbollah missile depots near Aleppo airport in Syria, killing 38 people and injuring dozens. State media also said simultaneous drone strikes were carried out by insurgent groups. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Hezbollah is paying a very heavy price in its cross-border exchanges with Israel in Lebanon and also in Syria. Over the weekend, the Syrian army claimed Israeli airstrikes hit near the international airport in Aleppo, causing material damage. Security sources told Reuters that at least 38 people had been killed. Syrian state media claims that the Israeli strikes coincided with drone attacks by insurgents. Israeli strikes reportedly hit Hezbollah missile depots in Aleppo's southern suburb of Jibrin. Hezbollah confirmed that 5 of its members were killed in the attack. Closer to the border, a Hezbollah missile targeted the Israeli border town of Margaliot without causing injury or damage. This after the IDF carried out 3 strikes in the southern village of Taiba. Earlier, an IDF drone targeted a car in Tyre, eliminating the deputy commander of Hezbollah's rocket unit, Ali Naim, in a drone strike. After the latest strikes, Hezbollah announced the names of 6 more members killed.
There was heavy security in Jerusalem this weekend as Israel guaranteed freedom of prayer for all religions amid the war in Gaza. A 3rd straight Friday of Ramadan prayer at Al-Aqsa Mosque atop the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City passed without major incident. This as the Israeli Christian community celebrated Good Friday. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
The Islamic Waqf says 125,000 people took part in the prayers, slightly up from last week. Some 3,000 police have deployed in the capital with strict security checks at entrances to holy sites. There were some minor disturbances. Police say they arrested 11 people in the Old City throughout the day, including several suspects for chanting incitement and support for terrorism following morning prayers. This marked the 3rd consecutive Friday of the Muslim Holy Month, during which mass prayers took place largely peacefully. This despite fears of disturbances after Hamas terror group had called on Palestinian worshippers to barricade themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This weekend was also Good Friday, celebrated by the Arab-Israeli Christian community. Hundreds of Christians participated in a customary Good Friday procession through the walls of the Old City, commemorating one of the faith's most sacred days when Christians commemorate Jesus' crucifixion. Participants marched slowly, some singing hymns and others carrying crucibles, along the Via Dolorosa, the cobblestone path where tradition says Jesus bore the cross to his crucifixion. Worshippers began the Easter festival with a procession through the Via Dolorosa to the Holy Spectral Church, where Christians believe Jesus was buried before rising from the dead 3 days later.
And wishing a happy Easter to all our viewers celebrating today. And moving on Saturday, tens of thousands of pro-Palestinians marched in London calling for a ceasefire. These protests almost always turn anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. Joining us now with more on this is ILTV's Ariella Lachiani. So another major protest in London over the weekend. What can you tell us about it?
Yesterday we saw a pro-Palestinian march in central London being held with over 200,000 attendees. I'm sure many of those attendees would say that they were protesting for peace as they called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. However, what we're really seeing a very strong undertones of an anti-Israel and, to be honest, anti-Semitic narrative. Chants which we often hear, such as "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," were heard throughout the protest, which many people argue it is the direct call for the genocide of the state of Israel. But to put it even more bluntly, chants erupted such as "Long live Hamas." Hamas is defined as a terrorist organization who self-admittedly seek the genocide of the Jewish state. So there's no controversy there in terms of what they seek out. And to be honest, if you're protesting for peace, which this movement claims they are, you would not be chanting "Long live Hamas." As we all know, Gazan civilians are suffering at the hands of Hamas. So this is very blatantly more of an anti-Israel movement than it is a pro-Palestinian one.
I mean, why is it, do you think, that specifically in the UK we're seeing such hatred towards Israel? I mean, even more so than in sub-Arab countries today.
To be honest, I think many factors go into this. I think a big one is that the UK is struggling with very extremist elements at the moment. But I think the most obvious issue, specifically as we've seen such a rise in anti-Semitism amongst younger generations, is the media. The media since the start of the war have been extremely biased in portraying the Israel-Hamas war. Maybe not a surprise, but that is in case the fact. Massive media outlets such as the BBC, who have refused since the start of the war to call Hamas terrorists and instead have been calling them militants, despite the UK's definition of Hamas being a terrorist organization. So the issue here is that they are generating an extremely skewed view of the conflict, and unfortunately the British population is subject to that, and it's clearly reflecting in the views in society and what we're witnessing at these protests.
And we've discussed this before. You're a London native. So how does the Jewish community in London feel these days, when seeing these protests?
Yes, well, on the one hand, the Jewish community has been extremely strong and resilient and united against this hatred, and they have received an outpouring of support from many other people in society as well as many political figures. But the harsh reality is, at the moment, the Jewish community is feeling extremely isolated and, to be honest, deeply concerned as to what we're witnessing in London. We have seen how the Metropolitan Police has been completely incapable of tackling this hatred. It's one thing to have posters of hostages ripped down, which we see on a daily basis, and frequent protests chanting, as I said before, these anti-Israel slurs, but it's something else to see the authorities of your city unable to protect you from this. Yesterday alone at the protest, we've seen a video of a police officer trying to contextualize the swastika, saying that the swastika is anti-Semitic dependent on context. Not so long ago, a man was arrested for simply holding a sign saying Hamas is a terrorist organization, in spite of the UK itself defining Hamas as a terrorist organization. So we're seeing not just in society a bias, but also in authorities, and that's deeply concerning. If the Jewish community doesn't feel protected from such hatred by the people that they are meant to rely on, then what chance do they have? Who can they turn to?
Who can they turn to? Ariella Lachiani, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we want to wish good luck to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who will be undergoing surgery this evening. And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of around 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, cloudy skies and rising temperatures set to reach highs of 29 degrees Celsius or 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Madarga Velazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.